him. Time has no meaning here. Your pain will
Emerge of my might.
With your death, this nightmare, my enemy ends. Skin you alive!
Life is
I'm better. I'm not the only.
Hello and welcome, Exiles, to a quirky little character that I'm calling the Bleed EQ Autobomber. Essentially what we're doing here is we're using the combination of Soul Ripper plus the Tides of Time new buff for Flash Generation along with Pathfinder Flash Generation in the sub-ascendancy of Scion. And the idea is if we have a decent duration Earthquake and I pop my Vaal EQ, this skill will, in the course of its whole duration, have enough time frame for me to generate charges in Soul Ripper where I get to use it again. Now, Soul Ripper procs the 25% chance to not consume charges, so this isn't really, it's kind of not showcasing my demo. But basically, by the time the skill would end, I would have enough charges in my Soul Ripper to proc this flask and then, again, to pop EQ and keep going. The idea basically being is, about once every 20 seconds, we do a Vaal Earthquake, and then we just keep walking around and blowing up everything around us. Now, the skill itself, if you look at Earthquake, has a thing that says it has an ongoing effect for 9 aftershocks, and then it gives you a base duration of the aftershocks. The way this essentially works out is you might be thinking, oh, 9 aftershocks, let's get in really quickly. 9 aftershocks is specifically talking about this thing right here, and it won't start another aftershock until the last one is blown up. And those aftershocks get scaled based on duration. So if you look at my skill effect duration here on this skill, you'll see there's a base duration of 1.74 seconds or whatever, and then a secondary duration of 20 seconds. Essentially how long the skill is going to last is if I'm constantly walking, it's going to last around 17, 18 seconds. If I stop moving a little bit and I don't create an aftershock, technically it'll last a little bit longer. But the point is, in that duration, in that time frame, if we have a Soul Ripper that's around 30 to 35 flash charges, essentially what will happen is the first 6 seconds we aren't gaining charges because I enchanted this for 80% recovery. But the idea is if we have about an 18-second window, for 12 of those seconds I'm gonna have 80% increased charge recovery. And if you get yourself Tides of Time plus the Pathfinder Sensi, we're getting 6 charges every 3 seconds. Then over the course of 12 seconds that becomes 24 charges, and then with 80% recovery rate, that takes you basically to that 40 charge range is roughly how many charges we're generating, and hence we have the ability to gain all those charges back to press Vaal EQ the second the Soul Game Adventure time ends, and it works out pretty worthwhile to chain them together. Hopefully I'm making sense. Anyways, we're combining that with, I decided to go with Bleed using the new Tempest Rising boots. I just wanted to see how good this can be in terms of like, there's not a lot of ways to use melee Bleed outside of Crimson Dance or some weird shenanigans where you weapon swap to ensnaring arrow the enemy to weapon swap back. The reason being is Bleed has a lot of its damage tied to the is the enemy moving tag, and generally that tag is just never active. And these boots solve that. They say, hey, if you have an elemental ailment on that enemy, then they will count as moving. Thus, you will get the additional damage because while they're moving, they take 3 times the damage they would versus when they're stationary. Hence, you either do Crimson Dance where you remove the moving debuff and then you have the ability to stack to 8 times, which doesn't work with the slow hitting big bleed scenario, which is what we want to do with Earthquake. We want to do kind of like a bigger one-shot bleed scenario. And then the other scenario is, the other condition is you could get the moving tag, but it would require some weird weapon swap to use ensnaring arrow to proc the while moving tag. And this just solves this. This is essentially an item that is pretty key if you want to do a bleed build that is not Crimson Dance or not a bleed bow. The unfortunate part is this competes with the Ralakesh boot slot, which essentially is a best in slot item for a lot of bleed or ailment builds, considering the combination you can do with frenzy stacking, the Maven belt, and affliction charges and frenzy charges and that sort of thing. So it's kind of like, it's in this awkward scenario where it competes for one of the best ways to do bleed, but it allows you to, it opens up some allowance to work in a slow hitting melee slam bleed style. So I'm not sure how I really feel about it. My main takeaway is It's probably still just better to go the Ralakesh route with a faster Crimson Dance style bleed build, or just be a bow character. Those are kind of your two options, because the slow hitting slams, it might be too much opportunity cost to use this. That being said, we were able to full clear all Ubers, and this is probably just on the edge of viability of, like, you can do Ubers, but it's going to require some decent gameplay. You can do T17s, it's going to require some decent gameplay, and it's going to require not bad map mods. T17s are really hard, and this is just on the edge of viability, depending on A, some level of skill, and B, not rolling very bad mods. I think the defenses on this character are decent. We are doing a Defiance of Destiny in combination with high max res, in combination with decent suppress. Ideally, I'd like to cap this, but I didn't get around to it. I'm only a level 93 character, to be fair, so just a little bit of specking decks for suppression. Probably could do a couple of those. That might get us there. Or just one more gear piece with a little bit more extra suppress built in could help there. Or we could go and just grab a little bit of nodes for inveterate, stuff like that. Suppress capping would be good. I didn't get around to it. And then also we have 70,000 armor, so that helps with our fizz reduction. We have endurance charges sometimes with Enduring Cry. And then we have decent res. Ultimately, I think the biggest weakness of this character's defensive kit is I don't think 4K life is quite enough, or 3.8 because we reserved for vitality. And I'm not quite convinced we have enough sustain. We can't really do leech with bleed with a bleed setup. We have some okay. Do we even have, I don't even know if I have % chance to leech. I might somewhere on if I remember to get Feed the Fury. I think I might have only gotten Fuel the Fights. I have some mana leech. I think I meant to get Feed the Fury, but I didn't get some level of life leech as well. But essentially, 400 regen from Vitality, occasionally with the Enduring Cry for 2k regen, and then every 4 seconds we get some regen based on our armor from the Armor Evasion Mastery over here. Ultimately, I don't think it's quite enough regen in my opinion, and so I would say defensively this character falls a bit short on what I would say is an acceptable threshold for very solid. It'll feel pretty clean most of the time, but it's not going to be foolproof. If you make mistakes in Ubers, you're going to die. If you make mistakes in T17s, you're going to die. If you make mistakes in T16s, you're probably not going to die in T16s, but that is where the threshold of defense starts to fall off and not be enough, is my opinion. Now I'll give you guys a quick showcase of this gameplay-wise, just to give you a look at how this character plays, why I consider it kind of an auto-bombing playstyle. And the idea is Vaal EQ plus the Soul Prevention Flask, and you just run with it. Now, initially when you enter a map, this flask has no charge. You see it generates charges as we play, but the idea is if you want to go straight to mapping, we do have regular Earthquake, like you can still slam, you can still kill enemies with that. And then once you get that first amount of souls, or the first amount of flask uptime, you can go and click Vaal EQ and then just start running around with it, having it blow up. I will say, if you're noticing the circles that are popping up a lot, that is just regular base Earthquake hits, not the aftershock. And so if you're thinking, oh, that's the 9 aftershock thing, you're going to run out of your Vaal EQ. That is not. That is a separate thing. Just want to differentiate that. That is what will clear most of the trash monsters and will kill most rares except for the tanky ones while you clear. And we are leaving behind aftershocks, which blow up after about 2 seconds. And every time we come off that basically threshold, we can re-pop our Vaal Flask to finish off whatever is there, if that makes sense. For the most part though, the base small hits will clear packs, and hence you can just keep running around with that. And then whenever we get to an enemy, then we will go like this, and we'll hit them with a bleed, and bada bing, bada boom. The damage is pretty decent, but it does require that aftershock to go off, because our base hit, although it is decent, is much lower DPS, because if you look at Vaal Earthquake, it says aftershocks deal 437% more damage. Essentially, if all we've hit the enemy with is just the base first hit before the aftershock, we're only hitting them for like a 20% of our actual DPS in terms of like how big the bleed can be. So hopefully that showcases that these small hits, they can clear packs. They're it's about a fifth of our like top end DPS. And then every 2 seconds, we're going to be popping off with one of these bigger aftershocks from it, which is the bigger hit that inflicts the bleed that's going to last until the next aftershock. And thus that's where our real DPS is coming from. The upsides are, it is some pretty good bleed DPS. The downside is, every time you get to a boss, if you miss time, if the first aftershock like goes off before you get to the boss room, there's going to be like that 2 second delay before you're getting really that full damage. So it can be a little bit awkward in that regard, and kind of is what it is. Man, I need to get better at remembering to go D&D when I do these videos, or whatever. Anyways, hopefully that gives a good showcase of this character. As for what I recommend the build, I think it's pretty solid for the lower end budget in Necropolis. Lower end being 50 to 100 divines is roughly how much I assembled this gear for, because Necropolis crafting allows you to make really good fizz weapons for reliably cheap. I'm going to link the Twitch VOD where I made all this character's gear if you want to look through of what recipes I did, but I mainly did Necropolis for like this weapon here, and it is super powerful that you can force triple T1 fizz. This is something we probably won't have in next league, and it's part of the reason I wanted to do it in this league, because it's more accessible than ever to make really cool fizz weapons. If you can't afford a Krui like this, don't worry. You can just use the Moroi Urki, which will probably cost you 1 Scion trade for a good roll, and it will do basically the same damage. The biggest difference with Moroi is you will have a much slower attack time when you go to press your Vaal EQ, and then you can just walk around, and you probably won't have Leap Slam on your bars. I mean, for the most part, we're not really using Leap Slam, we're just kind of just walking around anyways. So that was, if you want to cut a lot of budget out of this character, that's how you do it. You will need a bit more bleed chance if you go Moroi Urki than what we have here, but hopefully that gives you a good idea of what you can do. Ultimately, I was wanting to do bleed EQ because of A, the new boots, and B, because it's so easy to make some good fizz weapons in the current league. I will also say, if you're wondering, how are you inflicting an elemental ailment? There's a few ways you can do this. You could do skitter bots on your auras. That is a decent option. I chose to try out the Venipuncture ring because I could get a good corruption for really cheap. I wanted to get Cannot Poison, Pride Effect, and I combined this with our bleed build for ailments because it just gives us a base chill whenever we hit an enemy, and it works out pretty well. Another thing I will say is, in terms of making the builds more satisfying to play, I opted to go hemophilia gloves. Ultimately, I'm not 100% convinced this was the correct play. It did give us higher suppress, it gave us higher life, it gave us a little bit higher single target scaling because fizz.multi and bleed faster. So all those things are good, but removing the fizz pops, which are so satisfying, I'm not sure was the correct play in the end after playing through the character. I think it did remove some of the satisfying aspects of playing a bleed build. And I think if I were to do it over again, I'd probably go back to hemophilia. I would take the DPS, a slight DPS decrease and a slight defense decrease for that satisfying clear, because ultimately this build was just supposed to be a nice little run around, have things blow up around me, and I took out some of the explosions, and it was probably a questionable decision on my part, I would say. All right, anyways, this is the Bleed Quake Scion. Ultimately, I think it's decent. I don't think it's great. I don't think it's OP. I don't think it's bad either. But if you wanted to play a bleed build, I think this does it pretty decently. My main DPS scaling was via Adorned with Fizz dot scaling and a little bit of the new Piranha's Pack Jewel. This jewel is giving us a bunch of % Fizz damage from a Natural Instinct. This combo with Scion works pretty well. And ultimately, the reason I chose Scion over the other ascendancies was for the additional flash charge gain and the ability to have a bit more access to jewel slots and a bit more passives to push the jewels that give life plus fizz.multi as a lot of our damage scaling. Hopefully that makes some sense. Let me know what you think of the build in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care and peace out. The next project will be the Archmage Min-Max. We will see how that will go, as I don't know exactly. I hope it's going to be good. I think it'll be good, but time will tell. Anyways, take care. Peace out.